This is an interesting one that hits very close to home for us. This is going to come courtesy of Semaphore, which is also a great site, by the way.
It is.
The news here, well, the headline, start with the headline, the incredible shrinking podcast industry. And the news is that Apple has quietly tightened its reporting of how many people listen to podcasts, sending shockwaves through an embattled audio industry still reeling from the end of the COVID-era production bubble. The shift, Apple wrote in a blog post, was technical. The dominant podcasting platform had begun switching off automatic downloads for users who haven't listened to 5 episodes of a show within the last 2 weeks. But while few users noticed this shift, some of the biggest podcasts in the world saw their official listener numbers drop dramatically. Long-running shows that published frequently were hit particularly hard. A user who had listened to a show like the New York Times The Daily a few times, subscribed, but stopped listening, would continue to count as a download indefinitely. Even better under the old rules, for people who listened to a show, dropped off for a while, but started listening again later, Apple would then automatically download every show in between the last, listening. The arrangement drove big download numbers, a crucial metric for ad sales, and all of that. So, we have another story to pair this with just to get another angle on this, but basically they say the same thing, which is we've seen a dramatic decrease for most podcasts, especially those that are heavy Apple users. And the change here is basically if you don't listen to episodes, 5 weeks in a row, it stops downloading them, right? It stops automatically downloading them, which it didn't used to do. So it's probably a good thing ultimately for listeners, their space and all of that. But boy, does this hurt if you're a podcaster? I mean, what do you think?
Well, let's be honest with it. It probably started at the end of September.
That's right.
Into October, you and I were looking at our downloads saying, what are we doing? Like, have we made people upset? I really didn't know what the heck happened. And now we do. And it's happening to everyone. And if you just have to, the article goes into the fact that the top 10 podcasts by downloads have no comment. They don't even know how to answer because their entire media kits and the way they talk to advertisers and sponsors about this thing needs to change. And by the way, a lot of you that are listening to this have podcasts, but just so you know how it works, when we get contacted about somebody wanting to sponsor on this episode, the first question they ask is, how many downloads do you get per month?
Yep.
That's it. So, this affects that. Now, to your point, this is a good change.
That's right.
But again, it's very, very difficult. And I don't know if this is a question of, rented land again, but it's a downloads are just one vanity metric. And this is the thing that's tough about being a marketer and a content creator, because the fact that we don't really know with anything that we do.
Yeah.
Who's engaging. It's almost, when I was reading through this and looking at the data, Robert, I almost said, this is almost why I like leaning toward YouTube a little bit more when it comes to podcasting, because at least I get a view. If somebody has to watch it for 30 seconds to get a view credit.
That's right.
So, maybe they're only listening or watching for a minute or 2 minutes, but at least they did. In the past, with downloads on via, Apple Podcasts, there's nobody. You could have thousands and thousands of people downloading this thing, and they never open one of them.
Well, it answers a huge question that I've had for months and months and months about analytics, right? So you and I, as you mentioned, watch, obviously, because we're in the business and we care, and we also monetize this to a certain degree. Our downloads. And to your point, when advertisers come in, the first thing they want to know are the number of downloads per month, typically. And the interesting thing is, if you've noticed, by the way, that your other favorite podcast will often stick in just random episodes, a la something like Professor Galloway's show or those kinds of things. There's a reason for that, by the way. There's a reason that there's a frequency bias in terms of the number of shows per week, because if you do one a week, you get whatever your monthly download is, divide that by 4 or 5, depending on the month, of course. And that's the number of downloads you're typically doing per show. But that's not exactly true either, because what happens is that you divide that number by 4, and then what you get is sort of this weird long tail. Like the previous month, all of a sudden the numbers will go up. And now you know why, right? Because what was happening is that you come in and you're like, I haven't listened to the show for 2 or 3 weeks. You would hit download for watching or listening to the show rather. And now all of a sudden the previous 3 or 4 or 5 weeks would automatically download
the ones
too.
you didn't listen to.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you look backwards, you have to take that into account now as well. So the interesting thing is that it's not just a current month thing. Like this isn't going to be like a 1 month blip on most podcasters' downloads. This is going to trail for 3, 4, 5 months before things really normalize out. And so it's going to be a problem for some time is the point there. And a lot of people are filling their weeks with new shows precisely for this reason, because if they can get more shows in, that shows more, obviously you're more likely to automatically download something. And when you automatically download something, well, then of course, then there you go. So
yeah, you're right. You want to sell more sponsorship and advertising at an extra episode.
That's right.
Is your best way to because you don't need more people. You just need your current listeners to download. Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, but also this hits a lot of creator business models. I mean, not that we've been a part of the HubSpot podcast network for very long, but I'm under the assumption that the other ones have similar agreements to ours where you have to be at certain download numbers or they expect certain download numbers. Well, right off the bat, the numbers that everyone was using on every platform, we use Libsyn as our host, but you see it on any of them. Apple's not gonna be shooting those download numbers to you anymore. So everyone's just boom. They fell off a cliff and now there's a new plateau level.
Yeah.
And by the way, that could change again.
Oh, indeed.
Vanity metrics.
Indeed. Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see the sort of longer term effects of this. Because as you said, the networks that have set up, in aggregate will feel this even more, right? I mean, they're going to feel, when they've set up a network of shows, and it may be a network of even small shows. Well, they're going to feel this in a much more, in other words, the smaller your show, the more exponential this decrease is going to be. And because, you're going to, you lose X number of downloads for the small, let's call, hopefully a small number of people who don't listen every week or who don't download every week. And then if, taking that percentage, it's going to affect smaller shows way more than it's going to affect like the Joe Rogans or those kinds of things. Because if you're listening to Joe Rogan, you probably listen every week. 2, if you're not, it'll be a blip for him, right? It'll be some small percentage for him. But for small shows, this could be the crusher.
Yeah. And there's a lot of podcast listeners out there that listen depending on the guest. So
that's right.
Where it might take a hit if you're not.
Yeah, no kidding.
2 idiots talking like us every week about whatever's going on. I mean, it's a little bit different. We don't have guests.
That's right.
By the way, that a lot of people don't know that because about 3 times a day I get emails.
I get it too.
Saying that they would like to guest on.
Yeah, the CEO of X company wants to be on your show, because you have such great guests on your show, and it's like,
what for one,
okay,
what I might
listen to the show without telling me you don't listen to the show.
Well, for one, if I would consider it, maybe if somebody says, "Now I know you don't have guests, but if you did, like I'd be like, oh, thank you, at least you know."
Exactly. At least you listened. At least you cared.
So
right.
Here's your next guest.